The stagecoach wheels kicked up a cloud of dust as it rumbled to a halt outside the Oklahoma City station. Zara Williams clutched her small carpetbag with white-knuckled fingers, her heart pounding so violently she feared it might burst from her chest. The long journey from Boston to Oklahoma Territory in 1878 had left her exhausted, but the prospect of what, or rather who, awaited her arrival sent fresh waves of panic through her slender frame. "Last stop, Oklahoma City," the driver called, his voice carrying over the din of the bustling frontier town. Zara peered through the dusty window, scanning the crowd gathered at the station. Among the sea of unfamiliar faces, she searched for the man who would be her husband, a stranger she had agreed to marry through a series of carefully penned letters. The correspondence had been proper, even kind, but words on paper couldn't quell the terror that gripped her whenever she imagined a man's hands upon her. With trembling legs, she descended from the stagecoach, the late afternoon sun beating down on her travel-worn bonnet. She had sold everything she owned to escape Boston and the memories that haunted her there. This was her last chance at a new life, even if it meant facing her deepest fears. "Miss Williams?" a deep voice called from her right. Zara turned, unconsciously taking a step backward as a tall man approached. He wore a well-worn cowboy hat pulled low over his eyes, a simple button-down shirt tucked into dusty trousers, and boots that had clearly seen many miles of western terrain. His broad shoulders and strong jawline might have been handsome under different circumstances, but all Zara could focus on was keeping distance between them. "Yes," she managed to reply, her voice barely audible over the commotion of the station. The man removed his hat, revealing sandy brown hair and eyes the color of a clear Oklahoma sky. "Daniel Davis," he said with a slight bow of his head, making no move to step closer. "I'm mighty pleased you made it safely. The journey must have been difficult." When he extended his hand in greeting, Zara visibly recoiled, clutching her carpetbag tighter to her chest like a shield. Confusion briefly crossed Daniel's face before understanding dawned in his eyes. He lowered his hand slowly and took a deliberate step back. "I apologize, Miss Williams. I didn't mean to startle you," he said, his voice gentler now. "My wagon's just over yonder. We've got about an hour's ride to the ranch before sunset." Zara nodded mutely, following Daniel at a careful distance as he led the way through the busy streets of Oklahoma City. The frontier town was nothing like Boston. Wooden buildings lined the muddy main street, horses were tied to hitching posts outside saloons, and cowboys and settlers moved about their business with a kind of rough efficiency that spoke of the harsh realities of life on the frontier. Daniel's wagon was modest but well-maintained, with a team of 2 strong horses waiting patiently. He loaded her trunk and few possessions with ease, then turned to help her up, only to pause when he noticed her tense posture. "Miss Williams," he said quietly, so only she could hear, "I understand you might be uncomfortable. Please know that I mean you no harm. I'll wait right here while you climb up, and I won't touch you unless you say it's all right." Surprised by his perception, Zara nodded gratefully and managed to climb into the wagon without assistance, though it took her 2 attempts. Once she was settled, Daniel walked around to the other side and took his seat, keeping as much distance between them as the wagon bench would allow. As they pulled away from the station, Zara stole glances at the man she had agreed to marry. His profile was strong, his hands capable as they held the reins, but there was a gentleness in his manner she hadn't expected. "I know this isn't easy," Daniel said after they had left the town behind and were traveling through the open plains. "Coming all this way to marry a man you've never met. I want you to know something, Miss Williams." He paused, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "The agreement we made through our letters doesn't have to happen right away, or ever, if that's what you decide." Zara turned to look at him, confusion evident in her expression. "What I mean to say," Daniel continued, his voice steady despite the difficulty of the conversation, "is that I'll wait until you're ready. And if you're never ready, that's all right too. You'll have a home with me regardless." The sincerity in his voice made Zara's eyes burn with unexpected tears. She quickly blinked them away, turning to watch the vast prairie unfold before them. For the first time since stepping off the stagecoach, perhaps even since leaving Boston, she felt the iron grip of fear loosen ever so slightly around her heart. "Thank you, Mr. Davis," she whispered. As the wagon rolled onward, the setting sun painted the Oklahoma sky in shades of gold and crimson, casting long shadows across the prairie grass. Zara didn't know what lay ahead, but in that moment, a tiny seed of hope took root in soil she had thought barren. The Davis ranch came into view just as twilight was settling over the prairie. It wasn't as grand as some of the estates Zara had known in Boston, but there was an undeniable appeal to its sturdy construction and the careful attention to detail evident in the well-tended garden and freshly painted fence. "It's not much," Daniel said as he guided the horses toward the barn, "but it's home." "It's lovely," Zara replied honestly, taking in the two-story farmhouse with its wide front porch and curtained windows that glowed with welcoming light. As they approached, the front door swung open, and a gray-haired woman emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. "That's Mrs. Parker," Daniel explained. "She's been helping around the house since my mother passed 5 years ago. She lives in town, but stays over sometimes when there's extra work." Zara felt a wave of relief wash over her. The presence of another woman made the prospect of staying in a strange man's home considerably less frightening. When the wagon came to a stop, Daniel jumped down and moved to help with Zara's luggage, making no attempt to assist her from the wagon. "Mrs. Parker," he called, "this is Miss Zara Williams from Boston." The older woman approached with a warm smile. "Welcome, Miss Williams. I've got supper ready and your room prepared upstairs. You must be exhausted after such a long journey." With Mrs. Parker's help, Zara made her way into the house while Daniel took care of the horses. The interior was simple but comfortable, with a large kitchen and dining area, a modest sitting room with bookshelves lining one wall, and a staircase leading to the upper floor. "Mr. Davis asked me to fix up the guest room for you," Mrs. Parker explained as she led Zara upstairs. "Said you'd want your own space to settle in." Zara was touched by this consideration. In their letters, they had discussed practical matters: his ranch, her skills as a teacher, their mutual desire for companionship, but they had never delved into the reasons behind her decision to become a mail-order bride. Yet somehow Daniel seemed to understand her need for distance without her having to explain. The guest room was small but comfortable, with a single bed covered in a handmade quilt, a pine dresser, and a window overlooking the prairie. Mrs. Parker showed her where everything was, including the washstand with fresh water and towels. "Dinner will be ready in about 20 minutes, dear. Take your time getting settled," the older woman said before leaving Zara alone with her thoughts. As she unpacked her meager belongings, Zara caught a reflection in the small mirror above the dresser. The woman who stared back at her looked tired and afraid, her blue eyes shadowed with exhaustion and worry. She had been so focused on escaping her past that she hadn't given much thought to what her future would actually look like. Now that she was here, the reality of her situation settled over her like a heavy blanket. She had agreed to marry a stranger in a land far from everything she had ever known. And while Daniel seemed kind, experience had taught her that men's kindness often came with expectations she couldn't bear to fulfill. When Mrs. Parker called her down to dinner, Zara descended the stairs with cautious steps. Daniel was already seated at the table, but he rose when she entered the room, his manners impeccable despite the frontier setting. "I hope the room is to your liking, Miss Williams," he said, waiting for her to take a seat before returning to his own chair. "It's very comfortable, thank you," she replied, carefully arranging her skirts as she sat at the opposite end of the table, as far from him as possible. Dinner was a quiet affair, with Mrs. Parker doing most of the talking, filling the silence with stories about Oklahoma City and the surrounding area. Daniel ate methodically, occasionally asking Zara polite questions about her journey, never pressing when her answers were brief. After the meal, he excused himself to check on the livestock, leaving Zara with Mrs. Parker to clean up. "He's a good man," the older woman said as they washed the dishes together. "Lost his wife and baby during childbirth about 7 years ago. Threw himself into building this place up after that." Zara hadn't known about Daniel's previous marriage. In their letters, he had mentioned being alone but hadn't elaborated on the circumstances. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said softly. Mrs. Parker nodded. "He deserves some happiness, and so do you, by the looks of it." Before Zara could respond, the back door opened and Daniel entered, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. "Everything's settled for the night," he announced, his gaze briefly meeting Zara's before moving away. "Well, I should be heading to town," Mrs. Parker said, untying her apron. "Mr. Davis, will you be needing me tomorrow?" "If you wouldn't mind coming by," he replied. "I thought perhaps you could help Miss Williams get acquainted with the house and the routine here." Mrs. Parker gathered her things and bid them good night. As the door closed behind her, Zara suddenly felt very alone with Daniel, despite the spacious kitchen between them. "Miss Williams," he said, breaking the tense silence, "I want to make something clear. This is your home now, for as long as you wish it to be. The agreement we made through our correspondence, I consider it more of a possibility than a contract." Zara looked at him, trying to discern his true meaning. "What I'm trying to say," Daniel continued, choosing his words carefully, "is that I'll wait until you're ready before we discuss marriage further, and if that day never comes, I'll respect your decision." The unexpected declaration left Zara speechless. In Boston, she had heard stories of mail-order brides who arrived to find situations far different from what they had been promised. Yet, here was Daniel Davis, offering her safety and time with no immediate expectations. "Why?" she finally asked. "Most men in your position would expect—" "I'm not most men, Miss Williams," he interrupted gently. "I've known loss and grief. I've learned that some things can't be rushed or forced." He moved toward the staircase, stopping at a respectful distance. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's a new day." With that, he climbed the stairs, leaving Zara alone in the kitchen, her mind swimming with confusion and the first tentative stirrings of relief. That night, as she lay in the unfamiliar bed listening to the prairie winds outside her window, Zara allowed herself to consider the possibility that perhaps, just perhaps, she hadn't made a terrible mistake after all. Morning arrived with golden sunlight streaming through the curtains and the distant sounds of ranch life already in full swing. Zara dressed quickly in one of her simple dresses and made her way downstairs, where she found coffee brewing on the stove but no sign of Daniel. Through the kitchen window, she spotted him in the corral, working with a young horse. Even from a distance, she could see the careful way he moved around the animal, his posture non-threatening, his movements deliberate and patient. Zara poured herself a cup of coffee and stepped onto the back porch, watching as Daniel coaxed the nervous colt into accepting a saddle. There was something compelling about the way he worked, a gentleness that belied his physical strength. "Good morning," Daniel called when he spotted her, tipping his hat in greeting but making no move to approach. "Good morning," she replied, raising her voice just enough to be heard across the yard. "Mrs. Parker should be along shortly. There's bread and preserves in the pantry if you're hungry." Zara nodded and retreated inside, oddly disappointed that their interaction had been so brief. True to Daniel's word, Mrs. Parker arrived within the hour, bringing fresh eggs and news from town. Together, they prepared a proper breakfast, and when Daniel came in from his morning chores, they sat down to eat, the atmosphere less strained than it had been the previous evening. "I thought perhaps Mrs. Parker might show you around the property today," Daniel suggested as they finished their meal. "I have to ride out to check on the herd, but I'll be back before supper." "That would be nice," Zara replied, surprised by how much she wanted to learn about the place that might become her home. After Daniel had ridden off, Mrs. Parker took Zara on a tour of the ranch house and surrounding buildings. The property was larger than Zara had initially realized, with a barn, chicken coop, smokehouse, and a small orchard beyond the main house. "Daniel's father started this place with nothing but determination and a few head of cattle," Mrs. Parker explained as they walked. "Daniel's doubled the size of the herd since taking over. He's got a good head for business, that one." "How long have you known him?" Zara asked, curious about the man she had agreed to marry. "Since he was born," the older woman replied with a fond smile. "I was friends with his mother. Watched him grow from a rambunctious boy into the man he is today. She glanced at Zara. He told me about your arrangement, said you might need time to adjust. Zara felt her cheeks grow warm. He's been very understanding. Mrs. Parker nodded. That's his way. After what happened with Rebecca, his first wife, he learned that some wounds take time to heal. She paused, studying Zara's face. You're carrying wounds too, aren't you, dear? The perceptive question caught Zara off guard. For a moment she considered deflecting, as she had done countless times in Boston when well-meaning acquaintances had inquired about her withdrawn nature. But something about Mrs. Parker's kind eyes and the open sky above them made her want to speak a small part of her truth. Yes, she admitted quietly. I came here to start fresh. Mrs. Parker squeezed her arm gently, the brief contact more comforting than intrusive. Well, there's no better place for new beginnings than right here on the frontier, and no better man than Daniel Davis to give you the space to find your footing. As the day progressed, Zara found herself growing more comfortable with the ranch and its rhythms. She helped Mrs. Parker prepare vegetables from the garden for dinner and even ventured to the chicken coop to collect eggs on her own, taking a quiet satisfaction in these simple tasks. When Daniel returned in the late afternoon, dusty and tired from his day's work, Zara was sitting on the front porch, darning one of her stockings. He approached slowly, removing his hat as he came up the steps. "May I join you?" he asked, indicating the empty chair several feet from hers. "Of course," she replied, setting aside her mending. Daniel settled into the chair with a weary sigh, stretching his long legs out before him. "How was your day with Mrs. Parker?" "Educational," Zara said with the ghost of a smile. "She showed me around the property and taught me how to use your stove. It's different from the ones I'm used to." "She's been a godsend since my mother passed," Daniel admitted. "I wouldn't know what to do with half the things in that kitchen." A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched the sun begin its descent toward the horizon, painting the prairie grass in shades of amber and gold. "It's beautiful here," Zara said softly. "Different from Boston, but beautiful in its own way." Daniel nodded. "I've never been east of the Mississippi myself, but I've heard the cities there are something to behold." "They are," Zara agreed, "but they can also be confining." She hesitated, then added, "I like the openness here, the space to breathe." Daniel studied her profile, his expression thoughtful. "Space is something we have plenty of. Time, too." He stood slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. "I should wash up before dinner. Mrs. Parker doesn't tolerate trail dust at her table." As he disappeared into the house, Zara realized that for the first time in years, she had engaged in conversation with a man without feeling the need to flee. It was a small victory, but significant nonetheless. The days that followed fell into a gentle rhythm. Mrs. Parker came each morning to help with household tasks and left after the midday meal. Daniel worked from dawn until dusk, tending to the cattle, mending fences, and managing the business of the ranch. Zara gradually took on more responsibilities in the house, finding unexpected pleasure in creating order and comfort in what was slowly beginning to feel like her home. They dined together each evening, their conversations growing less stilted as Zara became more comfortable in Daniel's presence. He never approached her unexpectedly, always telegraphing his movements and maintaining a respectful distance. His patience was unwavering, his manner consistently kind, but never demanding. A week after her arrival, Zara was hanging laundry in the yard when she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Looking up, she saw two riders coming down the road toward the ranch. Her heart rate quickened, and she instinctively moved closer to the house, seeking the safety of familiar walls. Daniel emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth as he walked toward the approaching visitors. Zara watched from the porch as he greeted them, a man and woman, both dressed in the practical attire of ranchers. After a brief conversation, Daniel turned and spotted her. "Miss Williams," he called, "would you mind joining us? I'd like to introduce you to our neighbors." Swallowing her apprehension, Zara descended the porch steps and crossed the yard, stopping at what she considered a safe distance from the mounted visitors. "Miss Zara Williams, this is Jacob Turner and his wife, Martha. They run the neighboring ranch to the east," Daniel said. "Jacob, Martha, Miss Williams arrived from Boston last week." The couple smiled warmly, though Zara noticed Martha's curious glance between her and Daniel. "Welcome to Oklahoma Territory, Miss Williams," Jacob said, touching the brim of his hat. "It's always good to have new folks settle in these parts." "Thank you," Zara replied, clasping her hands tightly to keep them from trembling. "We're having a gathering at our place this Saturday," Martha added. "Nothing fancy, just neighbors coming together for a meal and some music. We'd be delighted if you both could attend." Daniel looked to Zara, clearly leaving the decision to her. The thought of being surrounded by strangers was daunting, but she also recognized that if this was to be her home, she would need to become part of the community eventually. "That's very kind," she said. "I would like that." Martha beamed. "Wonderful. It's been ages since we've had fresh faces at our gatherings." After a few more minutes of conversation about local matters, the Turners continued on their way, leaving Zara and Daniel standing in the yard. "You don't have to go if you're not comfortable," Daniel said once the riders were out of earshot. "I can make your excuses." Zara shook her head. "No, I should go. I can't hide away forever." She looked up at him, meeting his eyes directly for perhaps the first time since her arrival. Will you stay close?" Something flickered in Daniel's gaze, surprise, perhaps, or appreciation. "Of course. I won't leave your side unless you ask me to." The simple promise made Zara's chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't quite name. She nodded once and returned to her laundry, aware of Daniel watching her for a moment before heading back to the barn. That night, as she prepared for bed, Zara found herself thinking about the gathering on Saturday with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. In Boston, after what had happened, she had avoided social events, finding the press of bodies and the expectation of polite conversation too overwhelming to bear. But here, with Daniel's steady presence beside her, perhaps she could begin to navigate the world again. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. Saturday arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers across the prairie. Zara spent the morning fussing over what to wear, finally settling on her best dress, a modest blue cotton with white trim that had survived the journey from Boston relatively unwrinkled. When she descended the stairs, Daniel was waiting in the sitting room, dressed in clean trousers, a pressed shirt, and a vest that emphasized his broad shoulders. He stood when she entered, his eyes widening slightly as he took in her appearance. "You look lovely, Miss Williams," he said, his voice warm but respectful. "Thank you," she replied, a blush coloring her cheeks. "And please, after all this time, I think you might call me Zara." A smile spread across Daniel's face, transforming his features and making him look younger, almost boyish. "Zara, then. And I'm Daniel, not Mr. Davis." It was a small step toward familiarity, but it felt significant as they rode together in the wagon toward the Turner Ranch. Zara sat closer to Daniel than she had on their initial journey from town, though still maintaining enough distance to feel comfortable. The Turner homestead was already bustling with activity when they arrived. Several wagons and horses were hitched outside, and the sound of laughter and conversation drifted from the barn, which had been cleared for the gathering. Daniel helped with the horses, then walked beside Zara toward the barn, close enough to offer reassurance, but not so near as to cause discomfort. Inside, long tables had been set up and laden with food, while at the far end, several men were tuning instruments, a fiddle, a banjo, and a guitar. "Daniel Davis, as I live and breathe," a booming voice called out, and a portly man with a generous beard approached, clapping Daniel on the shoulder. "We were starting to think you'd turned into a hermit." "Been busy with the ranch, Thomas," Daniel replied good-naturedly. "Thomas, this is Miss Zara Williams." "Zara, Thomas Bennett owns the general store in town." Thomas's eyes twinkled with interest as he gave a small bow. A pleasure, Miss Williams. Mrs. Bennet will be thrilled to meet you. She's always complaining about the shortage of ladies in these parts. Before long, Zara found herself surrounded by curious neighbors, all eager to meet the woman who had traveled all the way from Boston to Oklahoma Territory. To her surprise, the women were welcoming without being intrusive, and the men kept a respectful distance, perhaps taking their cue from Daniel's protective stance nearby. Martha Turner proved to be a gracious hostess, introducing Zara to everyone and ensuring she had food and drink. When the musicians began to play and couples moved to the cleared space for dancing, Zara was content to watch from the sidelines, tapping her foot to the lively tunes. "You don't dance?" Martha asked, settling beside her with a cup of punch. "Not in a very long time," Zara admitted. Martha nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "Daniel hasn't danced since Rebecca died. They used to love it, never missed a chance to take a turn around the floor." She sighed. "Grief changes people, doesn't it?" Zara looked across the barn to where Daniel stood talking with Jacob Turner and several other men. "Yes, it does," she said softly, though it wasn't grief that had changed her, but fear. As the evening progressed, Zara found herself relaxing more than she had anticipated. The community was small but tightly knit, and their acceptance of her was evidently influenced by their respect for Daniel. Several times she caught him watching her from across the room, his expression a mixture of concern and something warmer, something that made her heart beat a little faster. It was late when they finally bid their goodbyes and started the journey home beneath a canopy of stars. The night air had grown cool, and Zara wrapped her shawl more tightly around her shoulders. "Are you cold?" Daniel asked, noticing the gesture. "A little," she admitted. He hesitated, then reached behind the seat and pulled out a blanket. Instead of trying to place it around her, he simply handed it over, allowing her to arrange it as she wished. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said as they traveled through the darkness. "I know it wasn't easy for you." Zara tucked the blanket around her legs. "It was nicer than I expected. Your neighbors are kind." "They're good people," Daniel agreed. "Been through hard times together. That tends to forge strong bonds." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon wheels and the steady clop of the horses' hooves. "May I ask you something, Daniel?" Zara said suddenly, surprising herself with her boldness. "Of course." "Mrs. Parker mentioned your wife, Rebecca, and tonight, Martha Turner said you used to enjoy dancing together." She paused, uncertain if she was overstepping. "Do you miss her very much?" Daniel was quiet for so long that Zara feared she had offended him. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but steady. "Every day," he admitted, "but not in the same desperate way I did at first. Now it's more like carrying her memory with me rather than being crushed by her absence." He glanced at Zara. "Time doesn't heal all wounds, like people say, but it does change them into something you can live with." The honesty of his answer moved her. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said simply. "Thank you." He guided the horses around a bend in the road. "Can I ask you something in return?" Zara tensed but nodded, knowing she owed him at least that much after her own question. "You don't have to answer if you don't want to," Daniel prefaced, "but I've been wondering what brought you to the decision to become a mail-order bride. In your letters, you mentioned wanting a fresh start, but never why." Zara looked out across the dark prairie, gathering her courage. She had never spoken the full truth aloud, not even to her closest friend in Boston. But here, under the vast Oklahoma sky, with only Daniel to hear, the words seemed less impossible to voice. "I was engaged," she began, her voice barely audible over the wagon's movement, "in Boston, to a man named William Harrington. He was from a good family, well respected. Everyone thought I was fortunate to have secured such a match." She paused, her hands twisting in her lap. "At first, he was charming, attentive, but after we were engaged, he changed." Daniel remained silent, giving her space to continue at her own pace. "He became possessive, controlling, and then one evening at his family's home, he cornered me in the library. When I refused his advances, he became angry, violent." Her voice faltered. He said that as his future wife, I had no right to deny him anything he wanted. Daniel's hands tightened on the reins, but he didn't interrupt. I fought him, Zara continued, the memory sharp and painful despite the years that had passed. I managed to escape before the worst could happen, but not without cost. His family had influence, and soon rumors were spreading that I had led him on, then cruelly rejected him. No one believed my version of events, or if they did, they didn't care. A woman's reputation is so easily destroyed. She took a shaky breath. I couldn't stay in Boston after that. Every man's touch, even the most innocent, reminded me of that night. So when I saw the advertisement seeking brides for the frontier, I thought perhaps I could start again somewhere no one knew my name or my shame. The wagon rolled to a stop, and Zara realized they had arrived back at the ranch. Daniel set the brake but made no move to climb down. Zara, he said, his voice rough with emotion, what happened to you was not your shame to bear. The fault lies entirely with the man who hurt you. His words, simple and direct, pierced the armor she had built around herself. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over before she could blink them away. I want you to know, Daniel continued, that I meant what I said when you first arrived. I'll wait until you're ready, even if that's never. You have a home here for as long as you want it, with no obligations beyond those you choose to accept. In the moonlight, his face was solemn and sincere, and for the first time since that terrible night in Boston, Zara felt something within her begin to mend. Thank you, she whispered, the words inadequate but heartfelt. They returned to the house in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before, one filled with understanding rather than uncertainty. As summer gave way to autumn, life on the Davis ranch settled into a comfortable routine. Mrs. Parker's daily visits became less necessary as Zara grew more confident in managing the household, though the older woman still came by several times a week, as much for companionship as for assistance. Zara discovered a talent for gardening, spending hours tending to the vegetables and flowers that surrounded the house. Daniel expanded the garden plot for her, building a low fence to keep out rabbits and bringing seeds from town whenever he made the journey. Their evenings often found them on the front porch, Daniel smoking his pipe while Zara read aloud from one of the many books that lined the shelves in the sitting room. They discussed everything from literature to politics, finding common ground in their views on education and the future of the territory. Physical proximity remained a challenge for Zara, but small victories accumulated over time. She no longer flinched when Daniel entered a room unexpectedly. She could pass him in the narrow hallway without pressing herself against the opposite wall. Once, when a sudden thunderstorm caught them both in the barn, their hands brushed as they worked together to secure the frightened horses, and though her heart raced, it was not entirely from fear. News from Boston arrived in the form of a letter from Zara's childhood friend, Elizabeth. William Harrington had married a banker's daughter and moved to New York, removing even the shadow of his presence from Zara's former life. The letter brought a sense of closure, a final severing of ties with the past that had driven her west. When October brought the first frost, Daniel began preparing the ranch for winter, a process that required extra hands. He hired 2 young men from town to help with the cattle and the harvest. And though their presence initially made Zara nervous, Daniel's careful introductions and their respectful behavior soon put her at ease. One crisp afternoon, Zara was in the kitchen preparing preserves when she heard a commotion outside. Looking through the window, she saw one of the hired hands running toward the house, his face pale beneath his tan. "Miss Williams," he called, seeing her at the window. "It's Mr. Davis. There's been an accident." Zara's heart stopped, then lurched painfully back into motion. Without pausing to remove her apron, she rushed outside, following the young man to the eastern pasture where Daniel had been mending fences. She found him lying on the ground, his face contorted with pain, the second hired hand kneeling beside him. "What happened?" she demanded, dropping to her knees opposite the young worker. "Bull charged him," the boy explained, his voice shaking. "Knocked him against the fence post. We got the animal away, but Mr. Davis can't stand." Daniel's eyes found hers, pain evident in their blue depths. My leg, he managed through gritted teeth. Think it might be broken. Zara assessed the situation quickly. We need to get him to the house. Can you two manage it? With careful coordination, the workers fashioned a makeshift stretcher from their jackets and carried Daniel back to the ranch house. Zara directed them to place him on the sofa in the sitting room, then sent one of the boys to town to fetch the doctor. Left alone with Daniel, Zara's earlier panic gave way to a calm determination. She gathered pillows to elevate his injured leg, cut away the torn fabric of his trousers to reveal a nasty gash and swelling that indicated a likely fracture, and bathed the wound with clean water. Throughout her ministrations, Daniel watched her with a mixture of pain and something else, surprised perhaps at her composure in a crisis. You're good at this, he murmured as she wrapped a clean bandage around his leg to stabilize it until the doctor arrived. My father was a doctor, she explained, concentrating on her task. I often assisted him when I was younger. When she had done all she could for the moment, Zara sat in the armchair beside the sofa, her hands still trembling slightly from the aftermath of fear. I'm sorry for frightening you, Daniel said, his face pale but his gaze steady. Zara shook her head. You have nothing to apologize for. Still, he insisted, I know how hard you've worked to feel safe here. Having me carried in like this couldn't have helped. The observation struck Zara forcefully. In the midst of crisis, she had touched Daniel repeatedly, examining his leg, cleaning his wound, helping position him more comfortably without a single moment of hesitation or fear. Actually, she said slowly, realizing it as she spoke, I wasn't afraid. Not of you, at least. Only for you. Their eyes met across the short distance between sofa and armchair, and something shifted in the air between them, a recognition of progress made, of trust building stone by stone. The doctor's arrival interrupted the moment. Dr. James Harrison was a no-nonsense frontier physician with capable hands and a brisk manner. He confirmed what they had already suspected, a clean break of the tibia, painful but not life-threatening. He'll need complete rest for at least 2 weeks, Dr. Harrison instructed Zara, as he finished setting and splinting the bone. After that, crutches for another month, minimum. No weight on that leg until I say otherwise. Zara nodded, already mentally reorganizing the household to accommodate Daniel's recovery. I'll make sure he follows your instructions. The doctor raised a skeptical eyebrow. Davis men are notoriously poor patients. His father nearly killed himself trying to work with pneumonia. He handed Zara a small bottle. Laudanum for the pain. Use it sparingly, just enough to help him sleep. After the doctor left, Zara returned to find Daniel attempting to sit up on his own. Without thinking, she moved to his side and placed a hand on his shoulder. The doctor said rest, not heroics, she admonished gently. Daniel stilled beneath her touch, and Zara suddenly realized what she had done. But instead of the usual panic, she felt only a slight flutter of nerves, manageable, even comfortable in its familiarity. We have a problem, Daniel said, easing back against the pillows. The cattle drive to the railhead is scheduled for next week. I can't possibly manage it like this. Zara considered the dilemma. The annual cattle drive was the ranch's primary source of income. Missing it would be financially devastating. Could Jacob Turner take your cattle along with his? She suggested, remembering conversations from the gathering at the Turner's farm. Daniel shook his head. He left with his herd 3 days ago. What about the men you hired? Could they handle it with proper instructions? They're good workers, but too inexperienced for a drive. We need someone who knows the trail and can negotiate with the buyers in Wichita. He sighed, frustration evident in the tight set of his jaw. I could send a telegraph to my cousin in Kansas. He's worked drives before. But even if he's available, it would take him at least a week to get here. Zara thought for a moment. What if we moved you upstairs to recover, and I converted the sitting room into a temporary office? You could direct operations from here, and the hired hands could report to you daily. Daniel looked at her with surprise. That's actually a good plan, but it would mean a lot of additional work for you. I'm stronger than I look, Zara said with a small smile. And Mrs. Parker can help. Between the two of us, we'll manage the house while you focus on the ranch business." For the first time since the accident, Daniel's expression lightened. "You continue to surprise me, Zara Williams." The following days were a flurry of activity as they implemented the plan. With the help of the hired hands, they moved Daniel to his bedroom upstairs, a painful process that left him exhausted but relieved to be in his own bed. Zara transformed the sitting room as promised, bringing in Daniel's desk from the small study and arranging everything so that he could conduct business during the hours he spent downstairs each day. Mrs. Parker came daily now, taking over much of the cooking and cleaning so that Zara could assist with ranch matters. The hired hands took on additional responsibilities, and Daniel sent for a third worker, an experienced cowhand named Tom Maxwell, who had worked on the ranch in previous seasons. With Tom's arrival, the cattle drive preparations accelerated. Zara found herself learning more about ranching in 1 week than she had in all her previous months on the frontier. She took notes during Daniel's instructions to the men, asked questions when they left, and gradually began to understand the complex business that sustained their livelihood. Each evening, exhausted but satisfied with the day's progress, she would help Daniel from the sitting room back to his bedroom, her hand supporting his elbow as he navigated the stairs on crutches. These moments of necessary physical contact had become easier with repetition, and sometimes, when they reached the top of the stairs and paused to catch their breath, their eyes would meet in shared accomplishment. The day before the cattle drive was set to begin, Zara was reviewing the supply lists with Tom when a wagon pulled up outside. Through the window, she recognized Daniel's cousin, Andrew Davis, whom she had only heard about through Daniel's stories. "Looks like reinforcements have arrived," she said, relief evident in her voice. Andrew Davis proved to be cut from the same cloth as his cousin, tall, broad-shouldered, with the same direct blue gaze, though his hair was darker and his manner more outgoing. He greeted Zara with a courteous nod before embracing Daniel, careful of his injured leg. "Couldn't let you lose a year's profit because of a run-in with a bull," Andrew said, settling into a chair in the sitting room. "Besides, Wichita buyers know me. They won't try to lowball our price." With Andrew leading the drive and Tom as his second, the last piece of the puzzle fell into place. The three men spent the afternoon finalizing details, while Zara prepared a hearty dinner for what would be their last meal together before the drive began. That night, after Andrew had gone to bunk in the bunkhouse with the other hands and Daniel was settled in his room, Zara found herself sitting on the edge of her bed, surprisingly emotional at the thought of the men leaving in the morning. A soft knock at her door startled her. "Zara!" Daniel's voice came through the wood. "Are you still awake?" She opened the door to find him balancing on his crutches, his expression troubled. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "I just wanted to thank you," he said, "for everything you've done these past 2 weeks. Without you, we might have lost the entire year's income." Zara shook her head. "I only did what needed doing." "No," Daniel insisted. "You did far more. You stepped up when most women would have been overwhelmed. You learned the business, you managed the house, you took care of me." He hesitated, then added softly, "You touched me without fear." The simple observation made Zara's breath catch. It was true somewhere between the initial crisis and the preparations for the cattle drive. Her instinctive fear of physical contact with Daniel had receded, replaced by a growing trust and, if she were honest with herself, a tentative affection. "I suppose I did," she acknowledged. Daniel studied her face in the dim light of the hallway. "Does that mean, are things changing for you?" The question was gentle, without pressure, but it demanded honesty. Zara considered her answer carefully. "Yes," she finally said. "Things are changing. I'm changing." She met his gaze steadily. "I'm not ready for everything that marriage traditionally entails, but I'm not as afraid as I was." Daniel's expression softened into a smile that made her heart beat faster for reasons entirely unrelated to fear. "That's more than enough for now," he said. "Good night, Zara." "Good night, Daniel," she replied, watching as he made his way carefully back to his own room. When she closed her door and returned to her bed, the emotional weight she had felt earlier had transformed into something lighter, more hopeful. Change was coming, slow but steady, like the turning of seasons on the Oklahoma prairie. The cattle drive departed at dawn, with Andrew leading 50 head of prime beef cattle toward the railhead in Wichita. Daniel watched from the porch, his frustration at being left behind evident in the tense set of his shoulders. "They'll be fine," Zara assured him, bringing him a cup of coffee as they watched the dust cloud of the departing herd fade into the distance. "I know," Daniel sighed. "Andrew's a good cattleman. I just hate not being there." With the ranch quieter than it had been in weeks, they settled into a new rhythm. Zara continued to help Daniel with the account books in the mornings, learning more about the financial side of ranching. In the afternoons, she tended to household tasks while he rested, his body slowly healing from the trauma of the broken leg. Their evenings returned to the pattern established before the accident: shared meals, books read aloud, conversations that meandered from topic to topic. But there was a new ease between them now, a comfort in each other's presence that hadn't existed before. One evening, as Zara read from a collection of Tennyson's poems, she glanced up to find Daniel watching her with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. "What is it?" she asked, marking her place with a finger. "I was just thinking," he said, "that I've never seen you with your hair down." The observation was unexpected. Zara touched her neatly pinned chignon self-consciously. "It's not proper to wear it loose," Daniel smiled. "We're hardly in Boston society here. Most women on the frontier are less formal by necessity." Zara considered this. It was true that Martha Turner and many of the other ranch wives she had met wore simpler hairstyles than would have been acceptable in Eastern circles. "I suppose you're right," she conceded. Then, in a moment of boldness, she set the book aside and began removing the pins from her hair. "Though I warn you, it's quite unruly when left to its own devices." Daniel watched in silent appreciation as her dark waves fell around her shoulders, cascading down her back in a way she had allowed no one to see since her arrival in Oklahoma. "Beautiful," he said simply. The compliment made her pulse quicken, but not unpleasantly. "Thank you," she replied, aware of the intimacy of the moment but not frightened by it. As October gave way to November, Daniel's recovery progressed. The doctor removed the splint, replacing it with a lighter brace that allowed for more movement, though still no weight-bearing. Andrew sent telegrams from points along the cattle drive, reporting good progress in favorable weather conditions. Then, 2 days before Thanksgiving, Andrew returned with news of a successful sale. The cattle had fetched top dollar, ensuring the ranch's financial stability for another year. The celebration that evening was joyous, with Mrs. Parker preparing a feast, and even Tom and the other hands joining them at the main house for dinner. As the others shared stories around the table, Zara found herself watching Daniel, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the strength in his hands as he carved the roast, the patience with which he listened to each person's contribution to the conversation. Somewhere along the line, without her quite noticing, he had ceased to be the stranger she had agreed to marry and had become someone dear to her, someone whose presence in her life she valued beyond measure. The realization should have frightened her, but instead, it settled in her heart with a rightness that felt like coming home after a long journey. Later, after the guests had departed and Andrew had retired to the bunkhouse, Zara helped Daniel to the sitting room, where a fire burned warmly in the hearth against the November chill. "Sit with me?" Daniel asked, indicating the sofa. Zara hesitated only briefly before joining him, though she still maintained a small distance between them. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the windows and promising the first winter storm of the season. "I've been thinking," Daniel began, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. "About us, about the future." Zara's heart skipped a beat. "Oh?" He turned to look at her, his expression serious but gentle. "When you first arrived, I promised I would wait until you were ready. That promise still stands. But after these past months, especially these recent weeks, I find myself hoping that perhaps we might be moving toward something more than friendship." The directness of his statement made her breath catch, but she appreciated his honesty. "I've been thinking about that too," she admitted. "And," Daniel prompted, his voice carefully neutral. Zara gathered her courage. "I care for you, Daniel. More than I expected to. More than I thought possible after what happened in Boston." She twisted her hands in her lap. "But I'm still afraid, not of you, never of you, not anymore, but of disappointing you, of not being able to be the kind of wife you deserve." Daniel reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, and covered her restless hands with one of his own. When she didn't pull away, his touch gentle and warm, he spoke. "Zara Williams, you could never disappoint me. All I want is to build a life with you, whatever shape that life takes. If intimacy comes with time, that would be a blessing. If it doesn't, your companionship, your spirit, your presence in my home would still be more than enough." Tears welled in Zara's eyes at the sincerity in his voice. Without overthinking, she turned her hand beneath his and twined their fingers together the first time she had initiated such contact. "I would like to try," she whispered. Not everything at once, but I would like to be your wife, Daniel Davis, in whatever way I can." The smile that illuminated his face made her heart swell. "Then we'll go slowly," he promised, "one step at a time." As if to demonstrate his commitment to patience, he lifted their joined hands and placed a gentle kiss on her knuckles. Nothing more, nothing less. Yet, in that simple gesture, Zara felt the promise of a future she had once thought forever denied to her. The winter storm arrived overnight, blanketing the ranch in a layer of snow that transformed the familiar landscape into something magical. Zara stood at the kitchen window the next morning, watching fat snowflakes continue to fall against a backdrop of white-covered prairie. "It's beautiful," Daniel said, coming to stand beside her, closer than he would have dared weeks ago, but still leaving space between them. "It reminds me of Christmas in Boston," Zara replied. "Though I imagine winters here are harsher." Daniel nodded. "They can be brutal, but we're well prepared, plenty of firewood stacked, the barn is secure for the livestock, and the pantry is stocked with enough preserves to last until spring." The mention of preparations reminded Zara of her own planning. "Speaking of which, I should start thinking about our Thanksgiving meal. Will Andrew join us?" "If the snow lets up enough for him to make it from the bunkhouse," Daniel said with a chuckle. "Otherwise, it might be just the two of us." The prospect of their first holiday together, possibly alone, sent a pleasant flutter through Zara's stomach. "I wouldn't mind that," she admitted softly. Daniel's eyes warmed. "Neither would I." In the end, the storm relented enough for Andrew and Mrs. Parker to join them for Thanksgiving dinner. The meal was a success, with Zara's pies receiving particular praise from the men. After dinner, Andrew produced a fiddle from his saddlebag and played cheerful tunes, while Mrs. Parker regaled them with stories of Thanksgivings past, including several from Daniel's childhood that made him groan good-naturedly. As the evening drew to a close and their guests prepared to leave, Mrs. Parker took Zara aside. "I've known that boy since he was knee-high to a grasshopper," the older woman said, nodding toward Daniel. "After Rebecca died, I feared he might never find happiness again. But the way he looks at you," she patted Zara's hand, "you're good for him, and unless I miss my guess, he's good for you too." Zara couldn't deny the truth of her words. "He is," she agreed, "more than I ever expected." After Mrs. Parker and Andrew had departed, braving the cold for the short journeys to town and the bunkhouse respectively, Zara and Daniel lingered in the sitting room. The fire had burned low, casting a warm glow across the familiar space. "I have something for you," Daniel said, reaching into his pocket. "I've been waiting for the right moment." He withdrew a small box and held it out to her. Zara took it with curious fingers, opening it to reveal a simple gold band set with a modest diamond. "It was my mother's," Daniel explained. "My father gave it to her when they first came to Oklahoma Territory. Nothing fancy, but solid, like their marriage. Zara stared at the ring, emotions welling in her throat. "Daniel, you don't have to wear it," he said quickly. "Not until you're ready. I just wanted you to have it, to know that whenever you decide, if you decide, I'm here." The sensitivity of his offer moved her deeply. Without hesitation, Zara slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit as though it had been made for her. "I would be honored to wear your mother's ring," she said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "And I would be honored to be your wife, Daniel Davis." The joy that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the prairie. "Truly?" Zara nodded. "Truly. I can't promise that everything will be conventional, but I can promise to try, to keep moving forward, to build a life with you." Daniel reached for her hand, covering the ring with his palm. "That's all I could ever ask for." They decided on a simple ceremony before Christmas, with Reverend Miller from the church in Oklahoma City officiating and only their closest friends in attendance. The news spread quickly through the small community, and Zara found herself the recipient of congratulations and small gifts whenever she accompanied Daniel to town. As the wedding day approached, Zara experienced moments of panic, old fears resurfacing in the face of such a significant change. But Daniel's steady presence and unwavering patience helped her through each moment of doubt. The ceremony itself, held in the sitting room of their home with boughs of pine and holly decorating the mantelpiece, was brief but meaningful. Zara wore a new dress of deep blue wool, ordered specially from the mercantile in town, and carried a bouquet of winter greenery tied with white ribbon. When Reverend Miller pronounced them husband and wife, Daniel leaned down and, with a questioning glance that Zara answered with a nod, placed a gentle kiss on her lips there first. It was brief, chaste even, but it sealed their commitment in a way words alone could not. The small gathering celebrated with cake and coffee afterward, Martha Turner declaring it the most romantic wedding she had ever attended, while Jacob teased Daniel about finally having someone to keep him in line. Through it all, Daniel kept close to Zara's side, his pride and joy evident to all who saw them together. As twilight fell and their guests departed with final congratulations, Zara and Daniel found themselves alone for the first time as husband and wife. The weight of expectation hung in the air between them. Tradition dictated what should come next, but their arrangement had never been traditional. "I meant what I said," Daniel told her as they stood in the hallway outside their bedrooms. "Nothing happens unless you want it to. We can continue as we have been." Zara studied his face in the soft lamplight, finding only sincerity and affection there. Taking a deep breath, she reached for his hand. "What if," she suggested hesitantly, "we took one more step forward tonight? Just being close. Nothing more than that unless it feels right." Daniel's expression softened with understanding. "Whatever you're comfortable with, Zara, we have all the time in the world." With gentle courage, she led him into her bedroom, the room that had been her sanctuary since her arrival months ago. They sat together on the edge of the bed, still holding hands, the silence between them comfortable rather than strained. "Could you just hold me?" Zara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think I would like that." Without a word, Daniel opened his arms, allowing her to decide how close to come. Zara moved into his embrace slowly, resting her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. His arms encircled her loosely, providing warmth and security without confinement. They stayed that way for a long time, simply breathing together, adjusting to this new proximity. When Zara finally pulled back slightly, it was to look up into Daniel's face with wonder. "This is nice," she said, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Very nice," he agreed, his voice rough with emotion. That night, they slept side by side, fully clothed, Daniel's arm a gentle weight across Zara's waist. It was a small step by conventional standards, but for them, it represented a monumental shift in their relationship: trust, given and received, fear faced and overcome. The winter months passed in a gentle rhythm of daily tasks and gradual discoveries. Daniel's leg healed completely, allowing him to resume his full duties around the ranch. Zara continued to manage the household, but now with the confidence of a true partner rather than a guest. Their physical relationship evolved at its own pace. Each small advance, a lingering kiss, the touch of skin against skin, the comfort of waking in each other's arms was celebrated as the victory it was. There were still difficult moments, times when old fears resurfaced and Zara needed space. But Daniel's patience never wavered, his promise to wait holding steady through each setback. By the time spring arrived, bringing with it new calves and the first green shoots in Zara's expanded garden, they had established a marriage that, while unconventional in some ways, was founded on a depth of understanding and respect that many couples never achieve. On a warm evening in late April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and rose, Daniel turned to Zara with a question. "Are you happy here?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. "With this life? With me?" Zara considered the question seriously, looking out at the land that had become her home, and then back at the man who had helped her rediscover herself. "Yes," she said simply. "Happier than I ever thought possible." She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his in a gesture that had become natural over the months. "When I first arrived, I was so afraid of you, of men in general, of what marriage would mean. I never imagined that I could find not just safety, but joy." Daniel lifted their joined hands and pressed a kiss to her palm. "You saved yourself, Zara. All I did was give you the time and space to heal." "You gave me much more than that," she corrected gently. "You gave me a home where I could belong. You gave me patience when I needed it most. You gave me the chance to become strong again." As twilight deepened into dusk, they remained on the porch, talking of the future of the herd's growth, of the plans for next year's garden, of the possibility that someday, when they were both ready, their family might grow. 5 years later, Zara stood in the doorway of the ranch house, watching as Daniel chased their 3-year-old son, David, around the yard, the boy's laughter ringing like bells in the clear autumn air. Their daughter, Elizabeth, named for Zara's childhood friend, slept peacefully in her cradle inside, just 6 months old, and already showing signs of her mother's dark hair and her father's blue eyes. The ranch had prospered under their joint care. The herd was now twice the size it had been when Zara first arrived, and Daniel had added 200 acres to their land. The house had expanded as well, with a new wing added to accommodate their growing family and improvements that made the frontier life more comfortable. Zara herself had changed too. The frightened young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Oklahoma City all those years ago had transformed into a confident ranch wife, respected in the community not just as Daniel Davis's wife, but as a woman of strength and compassion in her own right. When Daniel caught sight of her in the doorway, he scooped up their giggling son and carried him toward the house, his smile as warm and genuine as it had been on their wedding day. "Mama!" David called, wriggling to be put down as they approached. "Papa showed me the new foal." "Did he now?" Zara replied, bending to receive her son's enthusiastic hug. "And was it as beautiful as Papa said it would be?" "More beautiful," Daniel answered, his gaze meeting hers over their son's head, "just like its mother." The love in his eyes still had the power to make her heart skip a beat. With a smile that held all the joy of their shared life, Zara reached for her husband's hand. "Come inside, you two," she said. "Dinner's almost ready, and Mrs. Parker brought apple pie." As they moved together into the warmth of their home, Zara reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a mail order, bride terrified of a man's touch, to a wife and mother filled with love and purpose, it had been a path of patience, courage, and healing. Daniel had kept his promise. He had waited until she was ready. And in that waiting, they had both found something neither had dared to hope for, a love strong enough to overcome the past and build a future filled with happiness. That night, with their children sleeping peacefully and the prairie winds singing around their sturdy home, Zara and Daniel held each other close, grateful for the letter that had brought them together and the patience that had allowed their love to bloom in its own perfect time.